Yeah, I would like to invite everyone to be seated and settle down because we are going to start now. So welcome back to the hall. I hope you have good lunch. Let us go right back to the discussions. So session 3, we will talk about steering a post-election coalition's government. And we are really grateful and honored to have the speaker who had involved in the formations of unity government as well as presenter from Germany to share the best practice. We hope that these sessions will provide inspirations and guidance on building consensus, governing policy and common agenda. Now for these sessions, it will be moderated by Mr. Ooi Kok Heng. Kok Heng himself is the Executive Director of BERSIH. I'm sure you have seen him running around since the morning. He has long experience in research and writing for think tank and academia, news portal, books and magazine. So Kok Heng, the floors are yours. I will let Kok Heng introduce the sessions and also the panelists.
Thank you, Madam Chowing, MC. Welcome back, everybody, from your lunch break, and thank you very much for joining us for the whole day from morning to evening. I'm sure topicsnya berat, but discussion is heavy. But we are also thinking, this would be the appropriate venue to do it in the House of Parliament of Malaysia as we deliberate the future of Malaysian democracy. Having talked about political stability, the search for political stability in the first session, and second, the role of the opposition and shadow cabinet in the second panel, now we have come to what really matters. Because after elections, after manifestos, after all the political negotiations, there is the question of governing. How do you govern as a coalition or as a political party with the power that is now vested in your hands? So this is precisely the purpose of this session, this third panel, which is basically on the art of governance, if you like. Negotiating a post-election government. Topics of discussion will include strategies to build consensus, governing policies, and common agenda. I think this is particularly pertinent given that in Malaysia, for the first time, we have a post-election coalition government at the federal level for the first time. Parties who were previously competing against each other in general election form a coalition after the fact. This has happened before at the state level, but at the federal level, this is perhaps the first time. Let me quickly introduce our distinguished panelists for today. We have with us Yang Berhormat Menteri Datuk Seri Azalina Oman Said. She is the Minister in the Prime Minister's Department in charge of law and institutional reforms. She's also the current UMNO Information Chief. She is the previous Minister of Tourism as well as Minister of Youth and Sports under multiple Prime Ministers. She also created history by becoming Malaysia's first female Deputy Speaker in the previous Parliament. We also have with us YB William Leong from the People's Justice Party. This is his fourth term as Member of Parliament since 2008, and he is currently a member of the Parliamentary Special Select Committee on Human Rights, Elections, and Institutional Reforms. As you can see from the two panelists' introductions so far, both have background in institutional reforms, and this is something that is key to our agenda today. We also have with us Ms. Gisela Pipps from Germany, all the way. Thank you for traveling. I heard it's over 20 hours to get here. So she is a politician from Germany's Free Democratic Party and a lawyer. She was active in the youth chapter, Young Liberals, before being elected as the district chair of the FDP and in Düsseldorf. I'm sure I might have mispronounced it, but I try my best. And later the deputy chair of North Rhine-Westphalia before sitting on the FDP Federal Executive Board. She's also the spokeswoman for the FDP Parliamentary Group for Domestic and Local Politics and a member of the advisory board of the Federal Commissioner for the Records of State Security Service. We will also have with us Yang Berhormat Menteri Tuan Anthony Loke. He is the Minister of Transport And he will join us shortly from another program. He apologized for being slightly late. We'll be here at 2:30. YB Anthony is the Secretary General of the Democratic Action Party, DAP, in the Pakatan Harapan Coalition. He has more than 21 years in Malaysian politics and navigated various political coalitions and serving 2 prime ministers. Without further ado, I would like to invite our presenter for the day, Ms. Gisela, to give us an introduction about the art of finding, the governance. How do we navigate this post-election coalition governance? So please give a round welcome to Ms. Gisela Pilz.
Thank you for your nice introduction. I'm not sure if a lawyer can talk about the art of something, but I'm trying my best. Excellencies, Member of Parliament, dear representatives of the host foundations, ladies and gentlemen, as it now one of the hot topics, at least in my country, artificial intelligence. I asked ChatGPT about negotiation a post-election government, and this is what ChatGPT makes out of it. I'm just using an excerpt. The rationale behind negotiating a post-election government is to ensure that the government that emerges from the election is stable, effective, and representative of the interests of the electorate. The negotiation, I know it, process typically involves the leaders of the political parties that have won seats in the legislatures. Oh. First mistake, but okay. In some cases, negotiations can lead to the formation of a coalition government where 2 or more political parties work together to form a majority in parliament. This can be a complex and challenging process, as the different parties will have different policy priorities and will need to find a way to work together effectively. Overall, negotiating a post-election government is an important part of the democratic process and plays a crucial role in ensuring that the government is representative of the interests of the people and can effectively address the challenges facing the country. So far, ChatGPT, I was kind of astonished because it was very fast. There it was. But you wouldn't have invited me if it's that easy and that's fast. In fact, as you all know, it's much more complicated than that. And there are many reasons for that. First of all, we are talking about people, human beings, and not artificial intelligence. And all these humans have their history. All those people have their own history and their own stories. And the story normally begins ahead of the elections, because if you're elected in a parliament, you have a history in your party, in your constituency, and so the truth is the first step for this kind of bargaining, you can tell it, is to have a look at what you're doing before the election, because you're working in a constituency, and so it's a kind of working together or not with your other contestants. So I think that's really important. Second, by the way, don't forget the history of the party process, of the process in your party. I remember one member of my parliamentary party group who really was 4 years unbelievably cruel, because he didn't get minister. And so, you could destroy the whole history or the whole process of governing because you didn't get what you want. It's not, of course, my role model, because I think it's not that much help if you have such a big ego. because I think the country comes first, as Dr. Hofmeister said. But perhaps we need a little more women in politics. But this is my frank remark. Third, it is, of course, about the success of the respective party in the next election. You have to think about it. And to make matters worse, in Germany, there's a kind of saying, you are not elected for what you have done, or achieved in the past, but you get elected for what you tell the voters what you want to do. And I think that makes it even more complicated. As someone who has the privilege to negotiate coalitions at all levels in my home country, I know that the most important thing in such negotiations is the personal connection between the people who are negotiating and the trust. If you can trust on your opponent or to the other members of parliament, you wouldn't be successful. If the partners you can rely on what has been agreed to, then that is the best foundation for the next 4 or 5 or whatever years. I have met politicians at many levels who were no longer able to put aside their partisan differences, and you only have to look at now at America, what's going on there. I think that's not good for the country if you're not able to talk over the aisle, as they say. But in Germany, there's a saying: you can argue in parliament during the day, but you could drink a beer or whatever in the evening. And I think that's a good thing to do it. This is also important because you usually don't always keep your role forever. I've been 2 terms in opposition and 1 term in government. And so in our parliament, it's normal that you change your role. And if you've been not that nice in your government time, I think it's not a good idea for opposition. But of course, personal trusting relationships help in the turnaround of elections, but of course, as well during election itself. And we in Germany have the proportional representation, and I'm a member of the Free Democratic Party, and we normally never manage to be elected directly. So we are voted by a list, and so normally I talk to my colleagues from the Christian Democratic Union, and we make a deal. So they won their constituency directly, and I got the best second votes election result in the country. So I think both are served, and it was a good idea for the results to do it this way. But I think this is still an exception, but it can work. So I know this is not, it's not nothing for you, but perhaps you change your election scheme as well sometimes in the future. The next important point is to find the clearest possible regulations within the coalition agreement itself. It is very popular. It said it's about 100 pages long, even I think one of 140 pages of negotiations. But it's very favorable right now to if you can't agree on certain issues, you say, oh, we want to do, but we do the details later. And if you do that, you just postpone your agreement, and it doesn't make things easier. That's my experience. In order to take your party with you, that's another thing I could recommend, but it doesn't help if 5 people are negotiating and now they are going to their parliamentary group or party and say, oh, this is our result, and all your members say, what have you done? We don't want that. So please, if you ever think about coalition agreements, do it with a lot of people of your party. You need the know-how. You need the people anyhow. But it makes life more easier because who worked with you is usually more likely to share the result. My next advice is ask experienced people and involve them in the process. I know if you're new or if you were from opposition and get into government, you think, okay, I'm really strong. Nothing can beat me from now on. But there are so many, how do you call it, pitfalls on your way to government, because there are so many technical things, like committees, how big they are, who's getting the chair of the committees, and so on. You haven't even thought about that. That's my experience. And to share one of my bigger mistakes in negotiation progress, as I've been voted 1999 in the council of my hometown, and the Christian Democratic Union was well ahead of us, but they missed one vote for the majority, and that was us. And so we negotiated everything, and it was fine. Then after that, they say, okay, we have to enlarge our committees because we have that much people who want to be in the committee. And I said, yeah, okay, I don't mind if you're 8 or 9, I still just 1. And 2 years later, we struggled about a certain issue, and I said, no, I don't want that. And they said, we do it without you. I said, you doing it without me? We have a coalition, you don't have a majority. And they said, yes, we do. Why? Because they enlarged the committee, and so they've got the absolute majority in the committee. So of course they didn't have the majority in the council, but I said, oh shit, sorry. This is, but I was new, I was young, nobody, because 5 years ago, we have to unfortunately leave the council, so it was my mistake. Next negotiations, the Christian Democrats say, okay, we could stick with that big committees, and I said, no. They said, why? Because you got an absolute majority, so I get 2 members. And I say, okay, so. And 20 years later, we still have 2 members in the big committee, so it's kind of history. Sometimes it's that easy. If the coalition is working, and we have that issue in the session before, I think it's essential to meet regularly at the top level of your coalition. You've heard about the 30-hour negotiation in my country 4 or 5 weeks ago. This looks more like crisis than like government. And so as I negotiated the contract for my state level, I remember what we've done on my local level. We meet every Monday, 7:30 in the morning. Perhaps you don't like that, but it helps. And so they, on the state level, afterwards, they met every 2 weeks. And so in the first time, there were press and photos, and there was a big interest. But afterwards, nobody interests anymore for those meetings. And I think this is a good thing that there's no crisis coming up. They are not able to solve problems. You are able to solve problems, but you have to do it on a regularly basis. And that's it's a problem if you know your cards. My last point for now, it makes sense to decide many personal decisions at the beginning of your coalition. And it makes sense that you do it together with all those other things. Because afterwards, if you say, okay, there's an important role in some of our agencies or something, it's very different to be part of this, to get those negotiations right. And please do something about, normally nobody thinks, not just think about who is going to be what. Please think about the technical terms for about the rules if somebody has to leave. Because in our system, for the minister president, the president of a state president, he can decide if if a minister has to go or not. And if you're a working coalition and he wants to get rid of a minister, I think it's not a good thing for a coalition if he's doing so. But I think normally they can do that without asking their coalition partner. Normally, okay, if that's the way, or that's the point, the coalition is, let's make it that way, it's on rocks, I think. But I think it's give it a thought, at least what's about your positions and your personnel and how it gets there and how it leaves. And if you're surprised about some things I said, it's also because I'm a lawyer, and a marriage contract, for example, is not made for the most beautiful days of your life, but it's for crisis. So don't let somebody say, oh, we are going to work so good together, that we are now, everything's perfect. It's not, believe me. There are crises to come. There are a lot of crises to come. There are even things coming you won't foresee, like COVID, like the energy crisis, like the war in Ukraine in my country. So you have to talk, you have to trust each other, and you have to believe that this is the best for your country and the best for your parties, because there is no other way to be part of the government and of a coalition. So thank you for having me, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Gisela, for sharing your experience, witnessing and participating in the, negotiating coalition talks in Germany. I think that precisely, is the purpose of, this roundtable, where we want to facilitate the experience and best practices from other countries, as well as share, from the Malaysian experience. This is what we are going through, and let's see if there's anything, that we can emulate and perhaps avoid too. From other countries' experience. I would start the discussion in the panel sessions. We have YB Menteri Tuan Anthony Lok with us. Just joined us just now. We have already explained the panelist biodata, and YB Menteri Dato' Ajalina will have to leave early for the next program, actually at about 3:20. So I'll start the ball rolling with you, Dato', as punishment for leaving early. So, as being part of the in good spirit, we talk about, from the first panel, the speaker has talked about how we have to put aside personal differences for the good of the country, and Gisela repeated that just now. How coalition with different competing interests in the before the election has to put together, and to form a common governing agenda for the sake of the country. I'm sure this has been quite, heatedly debated, perhaps within UMNO, who was formerly a dominant party, and now that you have to work with parties who were previously your opponents in the election. So perhaps you can walk us through the process in which UMNO debate and persuade the leaders and as well as the grassroots to close rank and form a common governing agenda with parties who were your previous political opponent, and perhaps in your role as well, as a key minister in the cabinet in charge of law and institutional reforms. How do you prioritize and negotiate? Which reforms do you prioritize to work with, given that different parties will have different reforms that you prioritize? YB, please.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here, and also to give me the benefit to speak first, although the Secretary General for DAP is more senior than I am. Inside joke. Okay, good question. You asked me about the being, okay, to be very honest, I would never in my lifetime thought that DAP would be my partner, or even PKR. No, the joke, earlier today, I was in a luncheon with some editors. I said that, never thought that I'd be sleeping with DAP or even PKR, but we have been romancing each other for a few years when I was the deputy speaker, so it's not that there's anything frightening about them. But the key element here would be the decree from the king. I think for my party being a very Malay conservative, Malay Muslim conservative party, not as conservative as you know who lah, shall not be named, but the fact that the decree of the king was something that the Supreme Council of the party took into high consideration. Secondly, myself personally, because of the fact that we've been working together, especially on the anti-hopping law, with BERSIH's assistant, my party's exposure, participation, and also with PH, we realized that there are certain common agenda that we can work together. And for me personally, and this is not my party, is that I do get excited over reform agenda. And I felt that personally, in my view as the legal advisor for the party then, when we were communicating and talking about the coalition government, I personally felt that PH would be much better for reform, in the sense of they sort of understand the concept of reform. If I was given a choice to choose between PH and you know who me, not my president or my party as a person, as an MP for 5 terms, I felt more comfortable with PH when it comes to reform agenda. Your second question, you're asking me as the minister in charge of parliament, law and institutional reform. Of course, our system is a Westminster system. We bring it all up to cabinet and we continuously discuss. But of course, I don't deny the secgen of a political party like DAP in cabinet, can be a very beneficial partner in the sense I have to lobby him first outside please can help make sure the cabinet paper get passed and all that. But I think most importantly is that I hope this coalition government, for it to last, is that the reform agenda is what we want to see. It must come through. I think the public has higher expectation on the change agenda. One of these issues, like yesterday when I was talking about the ombudsman, I think people are expecting that when it comes to certain expectation on agencies that deal with public, they must be able to complain. What we have now is the Biro Pengaduan Awam that is considered inside setup, but the rakyat may want to see a more independent setup that takes in a complaint on public maladministration, for example.
Thank you, Dr. Sri, for sharing your insights and experience. Still remaining on the theme of institutional reforms, I would like to ask William, YB William, as a member of the Parliamentary Special Select Committee on Human Rights, Elections, and Institutional Reforms as well, how do you assess the current unity government's governing policies? I think especially maybe perhaps from the perspective of PKR as a centre-left party, you would see that there are very different manifesto items that were promised by the different political parties in the G15, and now that after the fact of the elections, you are working together. Do some people try to put aside the manifesto, or how do you find common grounds in that manifestos, and whether you are satisfied with the degree to which your party's items are being implemented by the unity government.
Thank you. As a first past the post election system, both the Malaysian politicians and the public are not used to the idea the day before the elections we are going after each other rigorously campaigning, and the day after the election we are busy trying to work together. And to some, they will see it as a kind of a betrayal, a selling out, that we are looking at positions and have forgone our party beliefs and principles. So the first challenge is actually finding a balance, because a post-election coalition government is only for this 5 years. And at the end, we are going to campaign against each other again. So maintaining the distinctive party identity of each of the coalition was the first and utmost importance. We do not want to come out of the coalition government with a damaged brand. But we still need to find ways to work together and to come up with a common agenda. And that is what we did in the MOU. A lot of people have looked at the MOU and talked about the anti-hopping part, talking about the appointment of the ministers, and few have looked at the significance of clause 2, where we have set out 18 objectives. And how were we able to do that? If you look at the ideology, as Lena is saying, that it's a conservative UMNO, but not as conservative as others. And DAP, Amanah, ourselves, we are multiracial. It looked as though that there is a wide gulf between us. But what we did is we start looking at each other's constitution in the process of doing this MOU. And we also compared the manifestos. And when we are sincere, objective, and practical, then quite obviously the problems faced by the people and the country comes out by itself. And then we look at the manifesto and you will find we are not really that far away. We have seen the same issues. Maybe it's a different approach. Maybe we are different, but it is only in degrees. And that is how we can sit down with the willingness that we need to find common grounds. So we put on a different hat. Before the election, we were looking at each other's manifesto and to find weaknesses and what is wrong. After the election, we put on a different hat and try to find common grounds. And that is what we were able to do and come up with 18 objectives with a reform agenda. And the next challenge is trying to convince our own supporters. And here I think the Agong played a very vital role, reminding us of the need to put national interests above partisan politics. And among ourselves, we realized that you need a working government. We cannot be having a political permanent campaign for 5 years. People are fed up, they need political stability, they need to go back and go on with their life. And I think that is, with that kind of approach, we were able to hammer out the MOU as the base. And of course, the mutual trust and the confidence and the interpersonal relationship of working together, I think is putting in place what would have seemed to be an impossibility of UMNO sitting together with DAP and PKR on the same workbench. So far it has been working, and I think if we continue with the same kind of attitude, I think we are going to last 5 years, especially with the anti-hopping law that we had been able to put in place. So I think to those who have been talking about the potential for, it looks like our marriage is at least going to last another 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, YB William. It does seem the theme or analogy of marriage here is very striking in this roundtable coalition talk and marriage. And of course, I guess the key couple here is between DAP and UMNO, being the subject of attention of this roundtable. And I want to turn to YB Anthony. As the Secretary General of the DAP, I'm sure there have been some difficulties, perhaps new terrains, uncharted territory to work with new political partners. Perhaps you can share with us some of the strategies and challenges that were faced by the party as you navigate this new fragmentation of very fluid political situation. And maybe as well, I think you could share, I'm sure part of being governance is basically conflict containment, right? How do you manage the conflict? Of course, we talk about common agenda just now. That's very important, of course, but you have to accept that there are areas where you disagree. So perhaps you can shed light on as well on the process and how mechanism in which you guys try to contain and manage the conflict between the different political parties.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, BERSIH, for inviting me and the organizer. I think working with our political opponent is nothing new for the DAP. We have been working with our enemies for the longest time. In fact, our partners today were our political enemies. Anwar Ibrahim was the enemy for DAP, but we worked together after he was sacked from the government. Likewise, we have worked together with other parties as well. And the most classic of example is was that DAP worked with Mahathir in the run-up to the 2018 general election. So the concept of working together with our political opponent is nothing new within the DAP. So I think that makes it easy for me to navigate the party. This political cooperation post-election in 2022 was made possible because of the changes in government in 2018. Because we have always been open to bipartisan or across the political cooperation. But as far as BN is concerned, of course, they were never interested prior to 2018 because they do not see that necessity because they were too strong. They can form the government every time after election. But after the 2018 general election, and especially after the 2020 political coup in Sheraton move, that make it necessary for every party to look at the various possibilities. Because as the saying goes, there's no permanent friend and permanent enemy in politics. So the realignment in 2020 make that more possible. And the fact that we already had some form of formal cooperation prior to 2022 general election in the form of the confidence and supply agreement between the opposition and the government then, make it easy for this process to take place after the general election. And I think the respective supporters, the respective parties, can accept this cooperation because everybody knows that without cooperating with each other, no party can form the government. And there will not be any government in Malaysia to be formed after the general election. And in the last general election, it was the longest for Malaysian history to form a government after election. Government has always been formed on the night of election. I mean, perhaps, of course, this is very different from Germany. I know Germany is very used to, forming government probably months after election. But for Malaysian context, no government ever formed more than 24 hours after election. Our last election, we took 5 days to form the government. So it is an expectation of the public that a government must be formed as soon as possible. So you cannot leave it in a vacuum, you cannot leave it in empty. for more than a week. So I think that make the process urgent for every parties to come together. But because we already had some form of cooperation before the election, through the MOU of political transformation, that make it easy for us to have the concept of what we are looking in terms of this cooperation. So before the election, or on the MOU, or it's actually basically a confidence and supply agreement, but we do not want to call it a CSA. The then government do not want to call it a CSA. They call it a MOU on political transformation. Basically, we are looking at what are the things that we can work together. You want our support, you want stability in the government. We do not overthrow the government in that period leading up to election. But what are the trade-offs? What are the things that you can concede? On the opposition side, then, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, me personally, I'm looking at basically only three things. First in the list is that you must give us money, allocation. It's basically allocation to the constituency. It's in the form of constituency development allocation, constituency development fund. Why is it important at that point? Because a lot of Malaysians were very, very upset with the political environment then. People are tired about politicking. So for politicians like us, we have to deliver on the ground. We know at that time we are not in the government nationally. We can't deliver in terms of policy changes. But at the very least, you can do something practical at the local level. So that constituency development location is very important for us as far as at least helping our constituencies concerned. Number two is we have to stop this crossing of law. So that's why we have to enact this anti-hopping law. So that was top in the list. And to a lesser extent, parliamentary reform, where opposition members can be appointed to the various select committee. So these are basically the three things that we look into in the MOU. And it works to a certain extent. So that makes it easy for us to justify why a political cooperation post-election is important. I think as far as managing our expectations and managing our conflicts, of course, we have to focus on what are the things that we can commonly agree. That, I think, is the basis of it. Of course, we still have differences. We still have issues which we cannot agree with each other. But I think we put that at the back burner. We focus first, what are the things that we can focus on? And I think if we focus on the common agenda, it's enough to keep us occupied for the time being. At least for the next 5 years. We are very clear. What are the things that we need to focus? Number one, we have to put back good governance into the picture. That's why we can agree on certain reforms in terms of parliament, in terms of the judiciary, in terms of law reform and all that. Basically, the whole context is to have good governance. Because we know with a good governance framework, then we can ensure a better economic development. That is our focus. So some of the other contentious issues, we put it aside first for the time being. But of course, along the way, we can revisit and we can discuss how to handle our differences. I think that perhaps that is the approach that we are taking currently. Thank you.
Thank you, YB. I do want to press on for each of the panelists' points, but I think, in the spirit of democracy, since we're in the Parliament of Malaysia, I want to open it up to the audience for them to be able to ask questions as well. And then I will also add into some of the points that were mentioned by the panelists earlier. So if there's any audience who would like to ask questions, we will allocate more time for this round of questions. So we'll have the gentleman over at the front, second and third and fourth. So nicely balanced across the hall. So for this round, we'll take the 4 questions. Please keep your questions short. Introduce yourself, your name, your affiliation, and direct to which panelist you want to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Senator Abun Sui. So my question will be to YBM Datuk Sri Azalina Osman, because I believe the current government will be most depend on UMNO or Barisan. Yeah, because I believe this PH will be want this government to end until full term. Yeah. So in this hung parliament, how to maintain this unity government to the last? Then I believe Datuk Sri Azlina will have this answer for this. Because there is a very rumors outside there, so-called they have the numbers. But under the anti-hopping law, I don't believe it. So I believe only 4 persons in this country that hold the government until the end of the full term. 4 persons, yeah. So the second question is for our Ms. Gisela Pitts. Sorry if I pronounce wrongly. You said just now during your speech that you have been in 2 terms as opposition, 1 term in government. So my question is, we know that Germany is a developed country, so we admire Germany. Sometimes we import the technology of Germany. So how the political scenario in German that helped develop this country until today? That is what I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you. You will collect the questions.
Thank you to all the speakers. I'm Wachla from the Center for Independent Journalism. I actually have many questions, but I think I'll just ask one first to Datuk Sri Azalina. I think your role within the unity government itself is critical, but I think more so your portfolio. And I heard just now at the, YB Anthony mention good governance. I think the question is, despite the agreement, the unity government, what we are seeing is very often than not, in attempting to reach the a common ground, there are a lot of compromises. And key areas for compromise also, is in the area of law reform. So I'm wondering what safeguards are being put in place to ensure that these compromises don't undermine real reform. Some examples, actually, with regards to, say, right to information legislation. YB, you talked about, the previous PH government and their, move towards reform. But the previous PH government in 2018 promised to move forward with right to information legislation and at the same time repeal the Official Secrets Act. Whereas now we see the government's position for both these acts to coexist. The same, I think, pushbacks coming or backslidings happening with a number of other commitments around law reform. Yeah, just wondering what are critical safeguards in place to ensure that Rakyat doesn't, are not continuously disappointed with regards to these reforms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rainer from Agora Society. So my question is, Malaysia politics seems to like mixing between the federal and states politics. Like I give example, like after 1969, we have hung assembly in Selangor, Perak, and in a few states. And when the post-election coalition formed in these states, then the opposition party which formed the coalition with the government of the day, they also being brought into the federal government, and they're becoming one coalition, which is Barisan Nasional. And then similar thing happened after last year when we have hung parliament in the federal level and hung assembly in Perak and Pahang. But even outside the other states that didn't have a hung assembly, still we can see because the PH and BN have formed coalition government at federal level, so it seems like the state level also they become a coalition, a friendly coalition, and there's it is also believed that the PH and BN will join force together to contest the 6th state election. So is this a healthy development? Shouldn't we try to delink and to let the federal politics and state politics go independently, so the states electors, they have more freedom to choose between the different policy of PH, BN, and PN, rather than you force them to choose to merit the PH and BN for the state election and then said and let them only can choose at the next federal election. I think you have unnecessarily narrow their choice. Okay. I think we should have independent federal and state politics. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's an interesting question on decoupling of state and federal politics. I think one more question here. Chin Huat.
Thank you. I have 2 questions actually. Number 1, The challenge for a post-election coalition government is that if you're going to contest in the next election, how do you maintain the difference as government partner and future rivals? Of course, I'm asking beyond the upcoming state elections. In G16, how are you going to maintain that? If you're going to come up with one single slate of candidates, then this is the end of post-election coalition. Second questions. Even with a simple single-party government, there can be tensions between government backbenchers and minister. But in the post-election coalitions, this becomes more complicated because government backbenchers posing questions to minister from different party may be seen as being sabotage, undermining the other party, not respecting coalition's rations and so on. But if government backbenchers all become very nice, then we would not have parliamentary oversight. How do we deal with this? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have 4 questions here, and some of the questions they've specified which Datuk Sri Raja to answer and so on. But I would let each panelist take each turn to respond to the question that were either addressed to you or is something that you want to have an input in. So perhaps, Datuk Sri, can we begin with you?
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe I just answer generally. I think, Prof. Wong, regarding your question about how do you maintain a post-election government, my general observation is because of the fact that we are a Westminster system. And in Parliament, we are guided by the whip of each party. So I see that if there's any tension, we will have to go back to the whip. That is by virtue of the relationship between the party. And to answer your question on the third question on the party politics of state and federal, most of the political party do have branches at the state level. I mean, we don't have a third government election. It's not to the extent of the grassroots participation, but the federal and state. And each political party would have its own strength and weaknesses and how they negotiate. And my general observation, even for this state election that's coming up, or any by-election in the future, it will be depending on the seats that is being offered and the candidates. For example, coming back to my opening remark regarding the relationship with BN and PH, one thing that's obvious is that the percentage of first crossfire on the seat is very minimum. Like we're not fighting the same seat, very low percentage among our members. Unlike the other party and us, BN, it's like fighting for the same chair, mostly because the voting patterns or the voters are almost identical, depending on area. So that itself may make our relationship to last longer because our seat are more, not say competing, we're not overlapping. And you know, politician, I think as the speaker know, lawyer is one thing, a politician is another. Seat is everything, right? When you're not in the representation as a member of parliament, and you're at the state assembly, negotiation of your party depends so much on the seats. So we can be the biggest party before, but now we've only 30 seats. You know, we are considered not big. They are bigger than us for now, It's a joke. So the point I'm saying is that you cannot forget the federal and the state relationship. Coming back to your first question on how do you maintain this relationship, you must not deny the fact, my biggest problem for institutional reform is the Constitution. Why? Because anything that I touch, I have to go back for a constitutional amendment. For example, citizenship. There's so many things you tell me on reform. Even I take it to cabinet, I get a support. I have to bring back to parliament, both upper house, lower house, and to get the 2/3. Okay if we have the 148, it's easy for me to do reform. Just come in, stamping, I get my reform out. I'm not going to get it that easily. Because even though I have the numbers of, say, 148, on the reform subject, I want to reform. A lot of negotiation must take place. For example, the issue on citizenship, maybe the political party may agree, but one of the biggest challenge which I think the Ministry for Home Affairs has to look into is the view of Majlis Raja-Raja on citizenship. Because there are certain columns that there are certain say, because there's third party that has a stronger say on certain things. So what I'm saying is that reform agenda is not so easy to send out, okay, let's reform, because the legal process for that reform takes a process. So you have to input that process. And that for me, I can bring in any reform, I have to take it to Parliament, lower house and upper house to get it done. I mean, for me personally, I'm quite pleased with the last session whereby we managed with the cabinet support on the mandatory death sentence to change to the discretionary death sentence. And then we're looking at some of the amendment. But you still, whether is it on constitutional amendment or on the 2/3, we still have to get the numbers in Parliament. To get the numbers in Parliament, even though as of now, we may have 148, but there's certain issues, even though on top of that, the party and the MPs may not cross the floor on supporting which, but on issues of or certain reform or certain law or new laws, they may have a different opinion. They may have to discuss within their party and come back to the floor, but when they stand up to debate, a lot of them are debating, whacking the government's policy, but they may be from the same party. But later we have to vote lah, by voice vote or belah bagi, whatever said and done. But that's my challenge, processing it with the existing structure that I have or we have. So when the rakyat say we want reform, it takes time. So we have to pick on the low-hanging fruit. But of course we would want the constitution a day that we can amend everything. There's so many things we have to amend. But it takes time lah. I don't think so it's so simple as to say 1, 2, 3 or ABC. Thank you.
With regard to Chin Huat's question, how do we maintain our identity and yet work together? At the moment, we can't say that we have got a formula until the next election. What we have is the goodwill and the understanding that for now we need to work together, but there will be a time that we will need to be contesting against each other. That's always the first time, but look at Germany, they have been doing it for all this while. So it is something that is in progress, and I think we have taken the first step. With regard to the federal and state, we have to leave it to the state and not expect that the federal is in a position to dictate to the state parties what is in their best interest. But as Azalina says, that whether we like it or not, it was an arranged marriage, not in heaven, but in a palace. And now the people in the state look at it and see that there's some logic into it. And UMNO finds that it is more advantageous working with us because we are not competing the same seats against them. So quite obviously, the state leaders can see it also. So I think we will leave it to the wisdom of the state leaders to decide which is the best formula.
Thank you. Senator, what is the development? I think perhaps 3 crucial points are, first, it's the constitution and strong election laws after the Nazi regime. Of course, it changed the way of election laws, and we're still profiting from that. And of course, it's because of the election law, because we have this proportional election, so that's very different from yours. So this leads to a kind of no alternative. In former times, there were more or less 3 parties in the German parliament, 2 bigger ones and 1 smaller. And so it's kind of logical what's going on. And it looks like we are obviously used to that, so we stayed with it, and so it was kind of easy because you're used to it. But of course, those coalition negotiations and coalition itself, it's not easy. That's what you said. It's not an easy one, and often, especially the small parties, vanished of problems. I myself lost my seat because of a coalition, and it's really hard to sometimes to be in a coalition. Of course, I think it's has something to do with a powerful and self-conscious parliament, because it's all about parliament, because you vote for the law, not the houses or not the ministers. So I think that's a part of the German, if you want to say success, I'm not sure. And to be quite frank, there's no alternative. So the alternative would be voting every year or half a year, and I don't think the results would be different. So I think we have to do that. And one last thing I thought about, because of your last question, was that if you're a member or within a big party and a big parliamentary party group, you have the opposition in your own group. So sometimes the leader of the bigger party or parliamentary party group told me, so we are really happy that you are there, because we can manage the coalition with you better than with our own people if we have the absolute majority. Yeah, you're smiling, but I've heard that, and I could imagine that, because if you're a really big parliamentary party group, you're so different, you don't have the same views at all. And so sometimes it could be easier within a party, within a coalition, than with an absolute majority inside governing, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Just on the issues of decoupling federal and state, I think in the Malaysian context, it's not so easy to decouple the two. Because for the simple reason that most Malaysian voters cannot differentiate between the federal and state election, with the exception of Sarawak. Because in the past, so many elections, up to the GE14, every election is concurrent election for Semenanjung. It's between federal and state. We vote together. We have two ballot papers, one for federal member of parliament, and the other one is for the state assemblyman. We have always voted together until 2022, for the first time that only 3 states have concurrent elections with the federal. So this decoupling of federal and state is not an easy process. But whether or not it will become a normal is yet to be seen, because for the next few years, perhaps, like it or not, there might be some separate elections. Because, for example, Malacca, it is more than 1 year gap, okay? Or Johor, about 1 year gap. So it's yet to be seen whether or not for coming next general election, whether it will come back together concurrently or there will still be separate election. So, but in order to decouple the two, one way, of course, you have separate elections, then you can decouple both. But you have to understand that if we work together at the federal level, it's very hard for us to fight against each other at the state level. So we have to make it as something that you have to get used to, where both federal and state you have to align yourself with. On the questions of whether or not this will be the first and the last post-election government, first of all, I think honestly we do not think about that matter right now, because our current preoccupation is that how to make this government works. If we start thinking about whether or not next election I have to kill each other, whether or not I have to ensure that BN cannot become bigger next round, then this government will not work. At this point of time, I hope that UMNO can win bigger. Because by them becoming stronger, this government will be better. It will be stronger. Because it's at the expense of the opposition, if they are stronger. So I think at this point of time, we do not think about fighting each other in the next election. To cross this immediate state elections, of course we will work together. We have made a decision not to contest against each other. Because by contesting against each other and yet working together in the same government is a recipe for disaster. That have been shown by the Perikatan and Barisan Nasional Cooperation, where they share the same government, but yet at the state level election, they fought against each other. And that has shown that it will not last. So for this unity government, the current unity government to work, we have to think about how to strengthen ourselves and how to continue to coexist by not fighting each other. Thank you.
Thank you, YB. I think that sounds like an intricate balance. I do have a question for both ministers here today. YB Anthony, you mentioned about prioritizing the common agenda, putting aside first whatever back burner or the ones that you disagree with, contentious issue. YB Azalina, you mentioned about Westminster system and so on, so they will need this multi-party consensus. But I do want to push both of you on this point, which is you have two ways of containing the conflict when you have contentious issues or disagreements. Number one, you can either reduce the number of decision makers. So everything is considered, Prime Minister approved, Prime Minister push for this. If Prime Minister doesn't say anything, okay, hold on to this. Or you increase the veto players. More people, so you need all parties to disagree, you need all, most of the ministers to agree, consensus cabinet decision making, then okay, we execute this. Because otherwise, how do you negotiate a common agenda, right? So that's the question I'm trying to pose to the both of you. How do you contain the conflict, either by, increasing the number of veto players, or number two, reduce the number of decision makers? Which path or in the balance that you go towards? Okay, keeping this question in mind, I think we can collect maybe 2 or 3 questions shortly, second round from the floor. We have lady over there, Senator, and over there. Okay, so for 3 additional questions for a quick round, please keep your questions very brief. Thank you.
Oh, maybe I can start first. Just as information, I'm from Sarawak. Why Sarawak is different in this decoupling of politics, federal and state, is because Sarawak has its own Sarawak-based party, which we do not, or which the West Malaysian party do not go there. In principle, during the BERSIH National, UPNO was not there. So the decoupling was very easy. So the Sarawak election is purely Sarawak issues. So there's no mixing of the same party or same player. But my question is actually to both the ministers. It looks like both of you are pretty comfortable in this relationship. Now, moving on, next election, would DAP be comfortable with other party? We are looking at UMNO now become smaller. The other party, to name it, is past, getting bigger. Would DAP be comfortable working with the other more conservative party? Since you say you have worked with your enemy, will you work with that too? What relationship would that be in time to come, 4 years' time, if that happened? My third question is, Singapore has a very interesting system. They tweet with their Westminster democratic system. Would it work in Malaysia? The GRC, Group Representative Constituency, to balance out, to moderate the extreme of race and religion in our society. Would that work here? Thank you.
Yes, may I? Very good afternoon, everyone. I'm Senator Ras. Sela, may I ask you this question? When you spoke earlier, from how you presented earlier, you somewhat in your heart, you wish there was more women in the political scenario in Germany. Perhaps you can share with us very quickly on that one, and what are the struggles that you find and challenging. And then to our honourable ministers, both of you, especially to YB Anthony, you mentioned that there's no permanent friend, there's no permanent enemy. So, but we are all permanent, rakyat of Malaysia. And we are tired of going through what we've been going through this last couple of months and years. So how can, maybe I shouldn't say how can we assure the public that everything is going to be stable, but what would you reckon you'd like to say to the layman out there, for the both of you? Because everybody's tired. You guys have been sleeping with the enemy somewhat, but working amicably. But everyone out there, in the next couple of months, they're a bit jittery. They're like, oh no, are we going to go through the same thing? So perhaps both of you could share your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Clarissa. I'm a journalist with The Fourth as well as a therapist in training. I just wanted to hop onto that topic of conflict for a second and direct it to the 3 YBs, because it's been shown that conflict doesn't necessarily lead to worse interpersonal relationships as long as there's repair. So I'm curious, if you can speak on behalf of the coalition, what the culture towards conflict is. Do you try to avoid it? Or what, if any, processes towards repair do you have when trust is broken?
And I think maybe Gisela can share as well from the German experience how the political parties manage the conflicts when they are in coalition government together. But this time, perhaps, maybe Angelina, would you like to start? Yeah, I'll just add on the question to her, so in case you need to.
Because I need to leave early. Okay. Thank you so much for all your questions. I think I can just sum up by saying that there's a lot of question on the future or the uncertainties. I don't know whether the Rakyat is happy with the marriage or not, but someone told me the complaint is less than before. Secondly, I believe that what is important is my personal view, not my party, although I'm the information head, is the state election is also going to be the testing ground for our relationship. Because the 6 states that is running is all going to be different variables. From Penang, which is more urbanized, Kedah, Semi, and Kelantan, Terengganu, extremely not say rural but conservative, and then Selangor and Negeri Sembilan. So to me, that is the test of this relationship, because the post-election coalition agreement that we have signed up to, we ran in independently as a party. Then we counted the numbers, as what William has said. We look into our strength to come out with this relationship. But maybe the measurement now is the state election. And of course, I don't deny the fact that some of the states will have a different measurement as to what is expected of the people. But from my general observation, if I have the wish list for this coalition government to last, I believe that the relationship between the post-election agreement must also be improved in reference to, I think we're short of a cabinet manual. In some jurisdiction, how the relationship can last is if the ministry that takes the agenda of their ministry is the composition is of all party representative in such ministries. Say, for example, some jurisdiction do that. But nevertheless, I do not deny the fact that right now we do have a secretariat of Kerajaan Perpaduan consisting of the political parties. Not necessary how we communicate or see each other only in cabinet. There is one portfolio which is in reference to the executive. But as far as the party is concerned, there is a secretariat. This secretariat is whereby the representative of this coalition party is there, from the Sarawak party, the Sabah party, and all the Semenanjung party. That is basically how I believe that if there is any such crisis or concern or dissatisfaction can be raised there, because there is where the party bosses sits in the secretariat. That is one issue. But if you observe the Prime Minister's speech recently, he has mentioned that it's for the state coalition to decide on the seats. He is allowing the 6 states to be starting the conversation on the seats. And as you know how Malay, I mean, if you are well aware, I have to emphasize this compared to Germany. They are mostly one race, one religion, kan? I mean, in the sense of the percentage. Kita ni multiple race, multiple religion, and people can be very sensitive even on small things. So because of that, political party is also needed to play a role, not only in governing the nation, but political party, whether they are in government or not, is to be able to bring in the concern and the voices of the people. That's why parliament democracy, that the changes that we're doing into the reform on the parliamentary reform for the upper house and the lower house, and with the select committee, is very much needed, because that is one way to look into the concept of accountability and transparency. I believe the future of this government will be a bright future if the government emphasize on a lot of transparency and accountability process. I believe it will be a bright relationship. Because the minute we stop on this, the challenge that I face even in my constituency, being a 5-term MP, is the new voters, which is the young voters. They don't quite understand on certain issue, but they know their rights to vote, and they make certain demands and certain needs. So, which means to say, in conclusion, I believe that continuously talking about democracy, continuously talking about participation of the rakyat and how the members of parliament or the state assembly react and respond to the need of the people would be a priority of the people for the future of any relationship, of any coalition. But then, of course, again, I will qualify my statement by saying that the state election is also something that we have to look at on our relationship. Maybe that is going to be the test, or that may not be the test, I'm not sure. Right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dato'. It was just pointed out to me that YB Larry, I think you wanted to ask a question just now. I didn't see you standing. Yeah, YB Larry.
Thank you so much. Actually, I wanted to ask the question of what efforts are being done on the parts of parties like DAP and UMNO in particular in trying to convince their grassroots on the suitability of this arranged marriage, so to speak, unity government. Because my personal view is that in order to see whether this is sustainable or past 5 years is to see whether one can actually deliver one's supporters, bring the supporters along, come election. So although the setup of this government is through a few operatives, who make this happen, but the grassroots, what is being done on the grassroots level, on the weekly basis, on the monthly basis, what is being done by the parties? Thank you.
Hello, can I ask one question, because Wabi Azalina is leaving, right? I have a question for Wabi Azalina.
Very short.
Yeah, okay. This morning, during the first session, Dato' Sri Wan Jonadi mentioned about how important it is to revamp the standing order. But then after Pandika, over the years, we've talked a lot about standing orders amendment, but there's no major amendment to the standing orders. So I would like to ask YB Azalina, what is the process involved in if you were to revamp the standing order? Thank you.
No, I have to, sorry sir, thank you. I have to inform you that the parliament now is extremely more independent. So the speaker is very proactive. Even on the standing order, we are looking, but there is a standing order committee. Yes, we are going to, yes, you're right, because we have to amend. One of the most crucial elements is the select committee in calling in government officers. I think they've come out with a certain terms of reference whereby the speaker is participating aggressively in this. To be very honest, this marriage of convenience or by decree of the king is a marriage that wants to put priority for the rakyat's interest. That one, I would be the first to go if it wasn't that objective of this marriage. You know me, if I don't like, I just resign. Okay. Secondly, to answer Larry's question, how? My measurement is on party election. The Deputy Prime Minister won the presidency. I think there's no problem. I don't know, another 3 years. But for me, this is democracy. No permanent friends, no permanent enemy, only permanent interest. So if the next person who runs for party election and wins and doesn't want to stay, so the person may go and bring all of us out. But the anti-hopping law is tying up our relationship according to what the party wants, because the seat belongs to the party, not to us individually. Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye, thank you.
Okay. Thank you to Dato' Sri Azalina for joining us despite her busy schedule. So now I guess YB Anthony, you are left with any ever burden of being the only minister having to face all the questions directed to ministers. So over to you.
Let me address both senators' questions together. First of all, we fully understand and we fully know that people of Malaysia are tired about politicking. They do not want to see changes of government too often. As I always joke, prior to 2018, many of our supporters were looking and were dreaming of changing the government. But the dream came true in 2018, but the changes took too many times in 5 years. So we saw 3 changes in government in 5 years. So people are tired about that, tired about politicking. They want to see a more permanent and a more stable government in place. And that is the reason why we put aside our differences and to make some compromises to make this government happen and to form this government together. with our political competitor previously. As my late national chairman, Kapil Singh, always mentioned, famously said that there's no permanent enemy and no permanent friend in politics, but there must be permanent principles. As far as the DAP is concerned, my interpretation of a permanent principle is that whoever forms the government in Malaysia, and we must always uphold multiracial, multi-religious identity of Malaysia. We must respect diversity in our country. And that is the cornerstone of this country. Multiculturalism must continue to be protected in this country. And that answers the question of Senator Lau from Sarawak, who asked me whether or not the DAP will be prepared to work with party like PAS in the next election. The current PAS at its current form, the answer is a definite no. Let me give a very firm, definite no. Because they do not believe in multiculturalism. I think that is my answer to that. If you look at their statements, you look at the speeches, at the views propagated by the president, they totally disregard Malaysia as a multiracial country. I think that is a big no as far as we are concerned. So like it or not, we have to make this unity government works. And despite a lot of differences within the parties in the current coalition government, I think this is the best for the country. This is the best that we can gather, that most of the parties inside this government believe in multiracialism. I mean, to be fair to UMNO, they have been working together with other parties since the independence of this country. So I think this is the best that we can work on, and definitely we will try to enhance the functioning of this government. And to answer the third questions by YB Rari, what are the steps taken to convince our supporters? My answer is very simple. If this government can deliver, that is the best answer to convince our supporters. If the government doesn't work, you can say it, you can meet every week, nothing will change. If this government can work and function well, develop the country, make reforms, everyone can see a better country, better governance in place, and a functioning democracy, economy is doing well, that is the best answer to convince our members. Thank you.
So there are two important points left for me. How much time do I get? Oh, no, I'm joking. I make two important points. I try to make them short. The first one was women in politics. Yes, I'm a member of a party with 20% members, female members. And I think in the German Bundestag it's a little bit better, but we don't have to do anything about it with it. Worse than the Free Democratic Party is just the right-wing party. That makes it even more bitter for a member of my party. And there are a lot of reasons why it's more difficult, because the perception of women is different. What they say, what they look like, what they're wearing. I can't stand that anymore, to be frank. But of course, if there are just 20% of members, how should you get 50% of seats or positions within the party? That's not possible. I'm sharing. I'm sharing responsibility within my party for 30 years, and nothing changed, to be frank. Everybody is talking about and saying, oh, we have to do something for women because it's kind of diversity, and everybody knows that the diversity has something to do with success, and it has had something to do with success because there are women voters out there. And some of them would perhaps vote for women and not for men. But still we are a manly dominated party, and to be frank, I think it's all about power. Less men, less power for men. And if they have to share positions, then there would be less positions for men, and so that's all about, to be frank. And if you're looking at other parties in Germany, like the Greens, they have a quota 50-50. And okay, sometimes we wondered, okay, does men think that's a good idea, that they just could be a candidate for every second place? But for women, somehow it worked. So there are a lot of young women now, you like it or you don't like them, but they are. You know, my party wouldn't have those women, not that much women, to be in higher positions. They have that. And so I think now, you know, no, I'm out of positions of real positions, and so now I think I would think that a quota would be a good idea. You can do it for positions. You can do it as a kind of success if your party, if your local party is doing a lot of women, and you know there are a lot of ideas I have, but my party is not yet sharing them. I'm trying my best, but it's I think it's still we are still struggling, and it's still a hard thing for women in my party. And the second question was about conflicts. I think conflicts in politics are normal. I think conflicts in human life are normal. I always say, okay, so when your family decides where to go on holiday the next time, you have to talk about it. If you're going to the beach or to the mountains, or I don't know. So life is about conflicts and solution for conflicts. But somehow voters think that politicians must be better people if they're sitting over there or over there. They couldn't imagine that it's the same thing discussing a law like discussing the next vacation or the next sofa. I don't know, you know what I mean. I think discussion is normal, conflict is normal, but I think it's you have to think about the way you are discussing, or the way you find a solution for crisis. I think, and to be frank, in Germany, with the six-party coalition, or not coalition, parliament, struggling or fighting or discussing things is part of a solution, and it's part of the problem. Because if you're not discussing things, the voters wouldn't know what's your opinion on that, and they can't vote for you. But on the other hand, the voters don't like that. They want you to be united, and if you're united, nobody knows what you're standing for. So it's a kind of difficulty. But to my expression, and I experienced that in my last coalition on the federal level. There were some of insults going on within the coalition, and nobody wants that, because the voters think if they think about themselves more than about us, then they are not right for us. So I think I think you have to talk, you have to discuss things, but you have it in a certain way, and you have to be very respectful with each other. I don't think insulting or something that would help, but it's still a kind of a solution and kind of a problem. But if it would be easy, we are not here.
Thank you, Gisela. I think we have about 7 minutes left, and I'm gonna let the crowd ask one more round of questions, and this is because this is the final session of the day. They have had 3 sessions. They sat through right through the end, so we're going to give the crowd one last round of opportunity to ask questions to our members of parliament, minister, and international expert here. So the gentleman over there raised his hand for very long, so that's 1, 2, and 3. Okay, I'm closing it off for the day. Hopefully no one will suddenly ask a question. So that's 3. We'll start with the gentleman, and then over the 2 ladies over there. Thank you.
Good evening. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. We've been talking about how to stabilize this kind of arranged political arrangement, but I don't think you have talked enough about how does it deepen or let our democracy be more matured. In this process, how can we make sure that it doesn't actually undermine democracy? Do you have such negative experience in Germany? We'd like to share. Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Yoklin Ho Yoklin. I'm from All Women's Action Society. In short, it's AWAM. I really like what YB and Tony just mentioned, that we try to work on principled. All right, and we have been, for the past 60 over years, we've been looking for valued leadership. Leadership carries the value, and I think that at the present moment, hearing from YB Azalina and some of the talk you have been putting forward, that we are in a situation, it's a no-choice situation, that we have to work with the devil that we once criticized a lot. So after the G15, many of us find it so difficult to bite in. So because in the unity government, we have people from up north who is known to be having this the corruption cases. And yet at the same time, we talk about in the G15, the slogan is fight corruption. Fight corruption and fight corruption. But unfortunately, the unit government doesn't represent fully of that value we're talking about. And I understand that YB and Tony talking about the multiculturalism, but at the same time, the other value that we have been talking about in the past donkey ever since the one MDP with Najib is corruption, good governance, integrity issue. So I mean, as a riot, we get very confused, right? Yet at the same time, we know that every time there would be a marriages, right? But YB Azalin has left. But the marriages is based on you fall in love with one another, and of course at the same time, this based on the value you're talking about. But what is the value that when we came together to form that marriage, you see? So I feel that now it is also, I understand it's a very difficult situation for us. You ask me, definitely no to pass. But assuming, right, but of course you did say that current path form. But if past has changed, of course there may be also a possibility to marry with past, which we did in before in the 1990s as a GD election. So at the end of the day, what are we advocating? What is the deepening democracy that we are talking about? What sort of value government that we could help to build, and including inclusiveness of women, gender, LGBT, all this. What sort of government we're building? I think that with that, the value, then we come up with that mechanism. So what is it that? So
Thank you.
I hope to hear more on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the last question is that?
My name is Wong from the National Council for the Blind Malaysia. I believe most of the rakyat, like me, the silent majority, we want to see a peaceful country, a good administration, everything going on smoothly. But apparently this marriage of convenience, we hope it will last. Unfortunately, we see that even in the same coalition, you seem to be shooting arrows at each other. So how can we contain this? As, for example, YB Antony, you are the leader of your party. How can we contain our members and ask them just to toe the line and not to say unnecessary things that will make the other side angry? So let us learn to accept each other, tolerate each other, compromise with each other. As you said, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. Maybe somebody has wronged us in the past, we must forgive. And let's move on and not try to shoot arrows at each other. Thank you.
I don't know why I've got this image of Cupid right now, but I'm pretty sure you don't you don't think about that. But you're of course right. I should talk about negative experiences, I think. But I think I've made those negative experiences because I lose my seat. But to be frank, for the history of Germany, who cares? You know, so I think, and my party gets in real trouble after 2013, but they managed to get back into the parliament 2019. But I think it's more about the state and parliament than about my personal history or about the party. So of course it's difficult, as I said, but as I said before, there's no alternative, not in Germany, because we don't have majority voting. So we have six parliamentary party groups in the parliament. In Eastern Germany, we have 6 parliamentary party groups of 5, and the second biggest one are the very right. Is a very right-wing AfD, and nobody wants to work with them together. So you have to form coalitions of parties who don't ever thought of working together. But I don't know how that works, but I think they looked each other deep in the eyes and said, okay, it's our responsible for the state, for the city, for the country. And as we often said, it's not a love marriage. It's about the country. And so I don't think it's, okay, yeah, personal negative experience, but over the last 70 years of German politics, it's more or less a success, I think. It depends who you ask, okay, of course, that's politics. And what was the other questions? No, I think I'm done. Oh, have I forgot some question? I'm sorry, I couldn't read my own writings. That's a big problem for me, so thank you.
I'll answer the question as to how can PH work with UMNO, where during the campaign it is anti-corruption, and then UMNO have got leaders that are now having corruption cases. I think the question was asked that very night among the leaders when the results came out that PH did not win enough to form the government. Would you want PH to continue to be the opposition and allow the other parties to become the government? Or do you do the next best thing and form the coalition government? You cannot get the top prize, but you will be able to carry out the reforms in your second priority. Is not getting the second priority better than nothing? I think that was the dilemma that we faced, and I think the answer was the unity government, that you may have no choice, but you may have to work with the devil, so to speak. But I think that is what we need to do, and that's what we have done. The wisdom will be judged with the state elections in the next 5 years. With regard to the third question about members shooting arrows at each other, I think there has to be a change in our mindset. Democracy needs to be more robust. It doesn't mean that we are on the same side, and if he does it wrong, I keep quiet. I think the change in the mindset, not only of the politicians, but also of the public, that you are being watched and you have to be able to answer whether you're on the same side or on the other side. It cannot be, as we have said just now, different principles applying to different sides. I think this is where we are getting into a deepening of the democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I just answered a few questions and wrap up. First of all, as a politician, I always believe this, that we will never operate in an ideal situation. What we need to do is just to look for the practical solution to any problems that we have to solve and we have to face. The gentleman asked me, how do I contain, as a party leader, how do I contain my members or my MPs from shooting each other, directing to within the coalition. But the theme of this workshop today is Deepening Democracy in Malaysia. If I start to contain and ask everybody to shut up, then I will be accused of killing democracy within my party. So where's the balance to strike on? Containing, everybody just shut up, everybody just toe the line, everybody just don't say anything, just follow the leadership. Then the same people, the same group of people, especially the civil society, will accuse democracy is dead in Malaysia. Democracy is dead in my party, and so on. So I think we have to understand the delicate situation that we are living on, and we have to also appreciate that there must be rooms for differences of opinions. But at the end of the day, what is important is that when decision is made, then it's a consensus among the leadership and way forward, and we strike the way forward. But in the process, we have to also allow rooms for some discontent, some displeasure to be expressed on. I think that's normal. And I think we start to engage each other, and I think progressively we can learn to respect each other's views and so on, even though there are some differences. And currently, if you look at our current political debate, sometimes it's not just shooting each other within the coalition, even within the party. And one of the most ardent critics of the Prime Minister right now is not the opposition leader. It's a member of parliament from his own party, right? And William knows it. From his own party, a member of parliament hacking the Prime Minister every other day on every issue. But the PM is cool about it. He never asked him to shut up. He never gagged him. So I think that is a spirit that we have to learn on, and to respect differences, and I think to ensure that we have a more functioning democracy. What is important, I think, and the agenda of this government is to empower Parliament. And that is one of the reasons why we empower more select committees, to ensure that members of Parliament have more rooms to deliberate on policies, on legislation, not just to follow blindly on the party whip decision. Of course, at the end of the day, when we come to voting, of course we expect that the government bills have to be passed. But the process of consultation will be there. That at the end of the day, when the bill is passed, more or less a consensus has been built, because we have gone through that consultation process, and the platform of select committee will be respected. So I think that is a spirit that we are working on. Perhaps I think that is the only thing that I want to sum up. I want to say is that this current experiment is work in progress. There is no ideal situation. Yes, a lot of things that is unanswered, a lot of question marks, but we just have to deal with it along the way. It is a progression, it's an evolution, and I think that we have to try our best to make it work. And there is no simple answer to that. What are the values binding us? Is that we have to ensure that Malaysia will continue to prosper, Malaysia continue to be a peaceful nation and respecting each other, and multiculturalism can continue to alive in Malaysia. I think that is the thing that we have to ensure, the values binding this government. Thank you.
Thank you, YB. I think YB made a very good point. As we empower more people, hopefully parliamentarians, select committee, there will be more noises. But noises is not necessarily bad. Noises are necessary in a democracy, and it's part of holding check and balance. Not necessarily just from the opposition, but as you mentioned, from members of parliament, backbenchers as well. I think that brings this panel session to a close, as well as the discussion for day one. We have another day of conference here, but for day one, we are coming to an end, and I, would really like to thank our guests. Speakers for presenting your insights and experience that will hopefully, in line with the theme of the conference, Deepening Democracy in Malaysia, jointly organized by BERSIH, Global BERSIH, and the Kofi Annan Foundation, who came all the way here. And I would like to conclude the panel on this note. BERSIH rose from a mass movement and now to converging influence, converging power for agenda setting. Everybody has an agenda setting to achieve, and for in this case, is democracy. So, like YB said, putting aside partisan differences and work for entrenching and deepening our democracy and what's best for the country. So, on that note, let's thank all our speakers today. YB Minister Anthony Loh, YB William Leong, and Ms. Gisela Weiss from Germany. Thank you all.
Thank you. I would like to invite the speakers to be on stage and invite Nimalas to present a token of appreciations. But in the meantime, please stay put for another 5 minutes because we have a last program for today. So we have come to the close of day 1, and we hope that it has been a productive day for the participants involved. I can see there's a lot of questions. In fact, I have comment that it's not long enough. We should have more time for the participants to ask questions and for the speaker to elaborate more. So I'm very glad on that, and we will take note. But we have now come to the end, and on behalf of the organizer, we would like to invite the ambassador and head of EU delegations to Malaysia. As you know, they are the main sponsor of this event, His Excellency Nicholas Rokas, to give a closing speech. As you know, today is also the European Union Day, the EU Day, which celebrate peace and unity in Europe. A true special day, and we are really honored to celebrate together on this European Day with all the distinguished guests here. So please put your hand together to welcome His Excellency Nicholas Rokas.
You can take the rose. Yes, I can sit down.
Thank you very much. Oops. Does it work?
You're a tall man.
Thank you very much. Hello? Yeah. It works. It works. So, thank you very much. Actually, we are very proud to associate ourselves, the European Union, and my colleagues from Australia and Canada, to this event. It was a very lively debate today, and on behalf of the European Union delegation to Malaysia, I want also to thank the Kofi Annan Foundation, BERSIH Global, and of course the Dewan Rakyat Parliament for organizing this debate. I will not even attempt to summarize what it was told. I think this is not the best way ahead, but I think democracies, they face challenges and they grow every day. Even the ones that they are mature, and in the country that I know best, Greece, where it all started, it evolved in a tremendous way throughout decades and centuries. So as democracies mature, all these topics that you discussed today, how hung parliaments work, how shadow cabinets should work, how steering a post-election coalition government, and the many other things they are going to discuss tomorrow, I think they are relevant to everybody. And I think also my team and our experts that they came all the way from Europe, they learned a lot. They learned themselves. And from the debate that is happening here in Malaysia, it can be beneficial to the democracies in the European Union and the way we face exactly the same problems. I think what matters is to create solid institutions and solid administrations that even in the event of hung parliaments, of coalition governments, that business continuity goes ahead uninhibited with the trust that either caretaker government or shadow government, they give the steer. But of course, the parliament plays a fundamental role, and the role of the committees, it cannot be more underscored. I would say also, I will add one more thing, that's what YB, Anthony Locke said in the end, the spirit to learn, and what is binding everybody in any parliament. And I feel a little bit nervous as a diplomat to advise. The foreign minister is not here. Maybe perhaps to him I could say a word. But the only thing I think it matters is what you said at the end, and you concluded it perfectly. It is what is binding the parliamentarians, and this is the values, the people, and the attachment to democracy. Therefore, on this very special day, because I understand this is the 5th anniversary of a complete change, a watershed moment for Malaysia when the one-party rule changed. It is also an auspicious day for us because not only Europe Day, but it is also the establishment of 20 years of the EU embassy, the EU delegation here in Malaysia. We face a world that is it is full of challenges and shifts that we could not have imagined. Who had imagined the pandemic, the war, the effect on supply chains, and all what is going on? So therefore, I think from this type of events, we become all wiser, and with this, I think I want to wish you a very good session tomorrow, and I want to thank all the participants, the YBs, the ministers, and again the Parliament for offering this auspicious room for this type of debate. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency Nicolas Rocas. Thank you. So this comes to an end. We also wish to say Happy EU Day to all who are celebrating. So today's session has come to an end. Tomorrow we will start here at 9:30 sharp. So please be here on time. Parliament's courtesy, Malaysia's hospitality. We still have tea and finger food to be served at the same place where you had your lunch. So if you are not in a rush, please feel free to have lunch, have tea, and mingle around and networking. So thank you. Have a good evening. We will see you tomorrow at 9:30.
Yeah.